Welcome to Thought Feeder. I'm John Steven Stansel, and with me as always is Austinite Joel Goodman. And this week we have a very special guest, Nickelodeon social media coordinator on the Live Stories team, Bailey Cargill. Thank you so much for being with us today, Bailey.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here and flattered to be asked to be on the show. And actually, my last name legally is Fontes. We got married before we had our big wedding that got pushed because of COVID. And so I haven't legally changed my last name yet. So social and everything, it's Cargill, but legally it's Fontes. So I don't know if there should be legal or social last name.
Whichever you prefer. We can go either way. We'll say congratulations on your wedding. And
Thanks. The big wedding is now moved for the third time to July 2022.
Oh, excellent. So
at least you get to have a big wedding. I mean,
exactly.
Lots of time to plan and all the tax benefits of being married. So there you go.
Yeah. But I guess for this, it could be Bailey Cargill. That's what I'm on all social media.
Perfect. So,
all right.
Excellent. Well, we're thrilled to have you with us here today. And so just to start with, other than the fact that you're changing your name, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about who you are and what you do on kind of a daily basis at Nickelodeon.
Yeah. So again, I am Bailey. I'm the social media coordinator at Nickelodeon on our Live Stories team. And with that being said, our social media team is about like 25 people. And most people are on the East Coast. Our little team is on the West Coast. And what we do is we focus on Instagram stories, TikTok, Snapchat, but mostly Instagram stories. And we're the ones we like to say our team runs a little bit like an agency. We do all our own brainstorming, our own strategizing. We go out and we capture the content. We're the ones that go to set and go to all the different events and work with talent to get everything that the social team needs. And then we edit together our own Instagram stories, TikToks, Snapchat. We edit everything together ourselves, create the content. And then we even look at analytics after, and we actually post everything ourselves. Being that Instagram stories, there's no tool to upload Instagram stories yet. I think a lot of companies are working on it, but that's something that we're still publishing ourselves every day. So it'd be nice to get that tool one day. But yeah, aside from work, I don't know, living in Los Angeles, it's lovely weather. I like to hike. I have a dog. I have a husband and love music. So it's all good.
Excellent. And I believe the dog has made a few appearances on y'all's Instagram stories as well, right?
So a while back, I made a TikTok account because I was like, I work in social. I need to stop being afraid of the social media network and try to figure it out. And so I personally don't really love being in front of the camera. I'm very much a behind the scenes kind of person. And so to play around with TikTok, I was like, I'll just use my dog to just test things and play with things. I didn't expect it to go anywhere. And just a few months in, I have over 500 followers on her TikTok account. And then with Nickelodeon, we're focusing on helping out. We had a girl doing all TikToks. And so now our team is focusing on helping her and creating content to lessen her workload. And so, when we're brainstorming, I'm like, well, I have a dog, easy access to a dog, and she works really good when offered treats. So it's been really fun. I'm making one right now for Pet Day coming up. So should be great. Spoiler alert, that's coming.
Excellent. That sort of content always really does well. And that's an interesting point because I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen for social media managers dipping their toes into TikTok is not really feeling comfortable being that on-camera talent and finding somebody who can do that. Because I think as social media managers, we all have different skill sets, and some people can do the on-camera content, but other folks, especially depending on like what industry you're in, for those of us in higher ed, I think there's something really awkward about a 41-year-old man getting on a TikTok and how do you do fellow kids. I think using your pet or finding other workarounds is a good way to enter into some of that content. So that kind of brings us into our first question really is that, Nickelodeon, you target a younger demographic. So what strategies do you use to connect to that demo and stay relevant and avoid running into that how do you do fellow kids problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's funny, yeah, we're a team of 25, me being one of the youngest or the youngest, to 40-year-olds on our little 5-person team for our specific part of the social team. And it's I think the thing with making content for kids is not holding yourself back and being as silly and as goofy as you want, and tapping into the things that when you were a kid, like that would have been so much more fun, and really trying to gamify everything. Because when you're a kid going through social media, just looking at content that's not engaging is boring. You want stuff that's fun and that you can interact with. So we try to utilize all the tools that Instagram has to offer and try to utilize them in fun and creative ways that kids might enjoy. And I mean, Nickelodeon, it's pretty simple when it comes to the content you're working with because it's content for kids. So using the IP and the shows that they love, mixing with engaging tools, it usually is a formula that wins, but also just testing everything, because sometimes it is hard where I'm like, oh, when I was a kid, I would have loved this. This would have been so fun. And then we pull the analytics and looks like kids didn't enjoy that very much. And I'm like, okay, I guess it didn't work. And it's just being goofy as possible, having as much fun as possible, and testing everything, because sometimes our hunch isn't necessarily right.
Can we talk about the data side of it? Because I think that's one of those things that is crucial to success with any sort of marketing and engagement marketing, especially. What are the sorts of metrics that your team looks at? How do you look at the data and the analytics that are coming in and interpret that into something that's useful for future content, or for changing things or improving on things, or even just knowing what to keep and what to pitch?
So when it comes to data, I love data. When it comes to social, and even when I was only working as a designer, data is so helpful. So you know what's working, what's not working, what to pivot on. And when it comes to our stuff, everyone looks at impressions. How many people saw it? How many times did they see it? I think it is valuable in a sense, and I think that's probably one of the biggest metrics that we look at. But one of the ones that's the most important to our little team of the big social team is definitely engagement, because we want to see who's sticking around and who's engaging and playing with the tools and answering the question box and all those different things when it comes to Instagram. And then I think outside of Instagram too, like comments are important. Comments are more important than likes, but likes are important too. And I think those are all more important than just who saw your work, but impressions are good too.
It's like all of those things kind of build into like being symptomatic of a healthy social
Exactly.
account. Like impressions aren't everything, but if
Mhm.
your account is doing well and is healthy and you're doing the right things, your impressions are going to go up, your follower account's going to go up, all of those things that we kind of roll our eyes as, oh, vanity metrics.
Yes.
Well, they are important too. It's just kind of, it's a bit of
Mhm.
like almost like your speedometer telling you, okay, this is where we're going. It's not everything, but it's a good quick indicator sometimes.
Exactly. And it's like impressions are important and followers are important, but if you're doing everything else right, like those are going to grow too. It's the ones that we really want are the ones that are sticking around and engaging with us.
And I think you do some things that are, I want to kind of step back a little bit because you mentioned like gamifying Instagram stories. And I think you're doing some like incredibly innovative stuff on Instagram stories that not a lot of people would think to do. You're kind of hacking the limited tools. And I think this is one of the things I get most excited about with social media is we're kind of at the mercy of the tools provided by the platform. So most famously, like links don't work in Instagram captions. So we have to kind of find some sort of workaround, and hence link in bio or something like that. But with your Instagram stories of Nickelodeon, you're doing some things like creating little in-story games that I never in a million years would have thought to have done. So could you walk us through a couple of these and how they've worked for y'all?
Yeah. So analytics off the top of my head, I don't have that. And I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share exact numbers or anything. But so something that my coworker on my team did recently that did really, really well for us with the Kids' Choice Awards, it was like those game like the when you put the ping pong ball in the cup and you move it around, you have to remember which cup had the ball in it. So he essentially had the idea, let's do some memory games. And so he had a fun time. I think he used Premiere, where he took the Kids' Choice Award logo and he shrunk it up, put it into a ball, shuffled the cups around, and you had to guess which cup had the logo in it. So not only are you having fun and playing a game, but you're looking at the logo coming in and out of the cup. So we are, in a way, advertising our event, but making it fun in a way that a kid's just playing a game. They don't realize that they're being advertised to necessarily. And that one broke records for us, I believe. That one did really, really great in regards to impressions, engagements, navigations, all those things on Instagram stories. And then one that didn't do as well for me as I hoped it would, being in the perspective of what's going to work for this demographic that I'm not necessarily in. So one of my struggles lately has been not making stories for kids, but making stories for adults that have kids. I recently was put onto the Nick Jr. account, and going from only making kids content to making content for adults that have the kids, it's been so hard for me to shift my perspective and try to figure out what parents want. I'm not a parent, so it's been very difficult. And I recently made a story that I think would have killed it on the Nickelodeon account, but it was for Paw Patrol. So there was an episode of Paw Patrol premiering where the pups, they had to save the donut machine. And so to advertise
I'm very familiar with Paw Patrol, so.
Yeah. So to advertise that upcoming episode, I did a game where you use the slider, and I put a little motorcycle on the slider. And the goal was to get the pup to the donut. And on the top of the screen, I had the donut moving around. So with that one, you have to try to use the slider and let go to where the motorcycle would hit the donut. And that one didn't really work so well for parents, because I'm like, if I were a parent, I'd still want to play games. Like, not as a parent, just as an adult, I like to sit on my phone and play games. So why wouldn't they? But trying to figure out, okay, maybe parents don't care about games as much. Maybe they don't even want to see Paw Patrol anymore. So just trying to figure out how to advertise and make engaging stories for parents now, as I am not a parent.
Yeah, well, I think in higher ed, we run into that same situation where we have content for students and prospective students, but also trying to market to their parents as well, because they're, sometimes they're the decision maker on that process, or are a major part of that, and trying to find content that both can relate to on the same account can be really, really a tricky line to follow. And I think also it comes back to what you're saying, is that you've got these pieces of content that you think are going to work really well, and you spent a lot of time on and crafting, and you put it out there and it's crickets, as opposed to something you wake up and create in half an hour, and it's like the biggest post of the year.
I was struggling with TikTok, because with Ella, I'll put together the most well-crafted TikTok where I spent so much time on it. I was making her sit and put hats on her. She's by the pool, like she's lounging, and it's the best TikTok I've ever made in the world. Gets 25 views, where then something where it's just the audio is, show me something in your house that lives there rent free. I just pan to Ella, and it gets like 13,000 or 136,000 views, and it's so frustrating.
As far as like crafting content for those audiences, for those parents and maybe kids as well, right? What other techniques, what other things are you kind of trying to consider when crafting that content?
It is hard when you're not the demographic. So I think, kind of like I said before, just testing everything and seeing what works, what doesn't, and going from there. But also, I think finding ways to stay inspired. For us, like, we look at other entertainment companies. Like, some of my favorite accounts to follow for inspiration are like Awesomeness TV. I think they do a really good job making Instagram stories that are innovative and creative. And Netflix and Hulu put out some fun stuff sometimes that I really like. And I think maybe for higher ed, like, what colleges do you think are doing well, and not necessarily looking at competitors as, oh, like they're doing so much better than me, and looking at it in a way that makes you feel bad, but looking in a way of, what are they doing that's creative and awesome, and maybe we can look at it and run with it and tweak it in ways that work for our university and for what our goals are. And for us, when it comes to coming up with ideas, it's just a lot of getting out there and being inspired, whether it's scrolling through Instagram for hours and TikTok, or just getting out and being in the world and trying to be inspired. Definitely harder this year with COVID, but non-COVID times, it's good to just get out and be inspired by the world and by people that you meet too. And I think one thing that I've loved about Twitter this year is I'm able to talk to, especially with Nick Jr. being my biggest struggle this year, I get to talk to people that have kids and ask, like, oh, like, what kind of content do you like? What are you looking for? Because you want to make content that they want to see, not just go on that gut feeling all the time.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I find that as I get older and farther away from the higher ed demographic, or at least one side of it, right? I'm getting closer to the parent side of the demographic and farther away from the student side. But yeah, you've got to get out and you've got to go talk to people and see what the young people want. And you hit on an interesting point earlier about saying, not being afraid to be a little silly and take some risk. And I think in higher ed, that's really hard to do, especially as there's a little bit more control from upstairs, people who know we have to be this, we are prestigious, we are important, we cannot make a meme or do something sort of silly. So have you, I'm sure, of course, Nickelodeon being a super creative, fun place, but how would you make that argument that you need to have a little bit more freedom and a little less guarded about?
This is every industry too, right, JS? It's like if you're not doing fun television and film content for kids, like you're always going to be tempted to be a little bit more uptight about the content that you're creating, right? Like part of that's just brand persona, I think. But like everyone could learn from just being a little bit less reserved about the content that they're creating. I think, like, I don't know if you feel the same way, Bailey, but like a lot of the stuff we see from companies and corporations is just the same. Like it's the same carousel with boring product shots that are all staged and have the same lighting or have the same, warm tones to them. It's the same types of stories that are going out. But, the ones that do, like you were saying with Hulu and Netflix, right? Every once in a while they do something that's really good and you're kind of surprised by it and like, oh, that's nice. I really liked that thing. And it does cause that inspiration, not even, I think, for just folks that are creating content that are, that are out there doing the marketing. But I think that's the same thing that the consumer, the viewer, the engager, they connect with that in a different way as well. Do you find that I don't know, do you agree with that? Like, do you think more companies should be a little bit less uptight about the content they're creating?
Yeah, so when it comes to different companies, it's hard because your brand has a voice and your brand has a personality. So I think that it's important to stick to that after you've done all your marketing research and you created a brand that is steady and you decided on the voice and the tone of that brand. It's good to creatively align with that. But I do think that a lot of brands should not take themselves so seriously and have some fun, take some risks, because at the end of the day, it's just social media, really. I mean, unless it's something that, because it's hard because you always have legal coming in, like, oh, like this could cause a lawsuit, like people could get really mad about this. And it is really hard. It really just depends on your company. And there are times where we have to kind of push back too, because we're working with all these different shows that have different executives that are in charge of them. And they might say, oh, this is a little too goofy for this TV show. We don't think that this is the right fit. Whereas us on the social media side of things, knowing what works for social and based off of our research and our analytics and things that have performed well, things that haven't performed well, and we think that this creative risk might work out for us. But sometimes those executives, they don't want to push it, and they don't want to take the risk as much as we want to take the risk. So, and ultimately, you have to listen to the people that are paying your paycheck and all that.
Well, it's interesting because you're working with somebody else's intellectual property, and sometimes it's their baby a little bit. And it's interesting. Right now, working on Invincible for Amazon Prime, it's like these characters are not something that I have created. That's something Robert Kirkman has created, and he tells a really interesting story about when they started Walking Dead, that the people that worked on the show were more protective of his characters than he was, where like he was like, yeah, sure, kill them off, I don't care, like let's shock the audience and kill off the main character in the second episode. And like the people around are like, no, you can't do that, people love that. So there's a bit of like, you have these properties that are in your charge temporarily, like you're trying to be a good steward of that character or that show a little bit. And it's a tricky balance, but it kind of goes both ways with that brand voice of that silliness. It's not easy to accomplish. Like I often struggle trying to explain to someone why one brand posting a meme works and another brand doing the same sort of technique doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
And part of that is just being a social media manager and learning from that experience and knowing that. But it kind of goes both ways. Like there are times where, I have had to tell people upstairs, no, we're not doing an April Fool's joke right now. We cannot be blasé about, in higher ed, like you cannot make a joke about a snow day because the students will destroy you, right? If you joke about not having one or something like that. So kind of knowing that line it's so delicate, I think is the best way to put it. Like that trust for the social media manager needs to be there of, okay, to take the risk, not to take the risk. It can be really tough to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard because they want to take care of their company and their baby. And yeah, it's really just learning what to push back on, what to not push back on. And your stuff as a social media manager, but they also know their brand and their company. So like you said, it's a balance, and that push and pull, you just have to learn.
One thing, I think is real fascinating in working in social media too. So few of us who have been working in this, because this was not a job when I was in college. If you got in a time machine and told me 10 years ago that this is what I was going to be doing for a living, I would have laughed. Actually, I would have been like, what is it? Any of that.
I did social media marketing on MySpace before there was an actual term for it. So
I got an invite to join Facebook while I was living in Japan from a friend who was still in college. And I thought, like, why do I need this? I already have MySpace. But anyhow, like, you started your career as a graphic designer. So how did that transition happen for you? And two, follow-up question, how has being a graphic designer and understanding design principles helped you as a social media manager?
Oh, you want me to bash on Canva, don't you? Ask you for it.
No comment. I've gotten in enough trouble over that. But yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm like, let's take this back to high school. I did yearbook in high school and fell in love with design, went on to college and was like, yep, this is what's for me. My goal has always been to do design in the music industry, actually. I really love music and I love musicians, and I've never been talented enough to be a musician, but I love that industry and I just love music-minded people. So that was always my goal all through college. All my portfolio pieces were always music based. And yeah, that was always the goal, or at least the entertainment industry. So luckily I ended up in the entertainment industry. Who knows, maybe music's still in my future. But after college, I got an internship doing design, but as a social media intern at a very, very small company, I was asked to not only design everything, whether it's social, digital, print, whatever, but also, can you copyright? Like, can you write up all the captions? Can you post the social media content? Can you run analytics? Just doing all things social on top of design, which, looking back, I'm very frustrated about that because I know now that they're taking advantage of me, and that's multiple jobs in one. But on the other side of things, it's what introduced me to social, and it helped me to see that I love social so much. And then I ended up getting a job, my first full-time job, at a marketing agency doing graphic design. And with time, they didn't have a social media manager running their own accounts or their clients' accounts. And I was like, what are you doing? And so I was pushing more and more to help in the social side of things while still designing, and moving away from designing for print and for packaging. That was kind of my boundary. If I'm going to help with social, I still love design. Can I just do design for digital ads and like social? And so started managing their social media accounts for the company, for the agency, for their clients, and then going into copywriting and kind of falling into that same pattern I fell into at the last agency I interned at. And then from there, I found another job at Nickelodeon that was available to apply for. And this job, it's funny because it's also a mix between social and design. I'm getting to video edit and design my stories and anything we make for social that I get to help with. But I also get to look at analytics and strategize and do all the social things. And now I'm also social producing. I get to go to sets and capture content with talent as well. And it's hard when you have two passions.
Well, I was thinking about this today because there is that frustration where social media managers are expected to be this army of one and multi-talented and be able to do social, but also write and edit video and photography and graphic design and all these other things. And while I think that's unfair to ask of one person because no one can do all of those things and do all of those things well, I do think it behooves anyone working in social media to have a secondary or third skill that they can kind of use to market or set themselves apart a little bit, and also to kind of work better on a team. I'm not a professional graphic designer, but I know enough about design that I can go talk to a design team and not just say, make this graphic pop, right? I
Just
can
make the text bigger, make the logo
right.
smaller. Well, no one ever says that, actually.
Logo's always bigger.
Always got to be bigger.
Logo gets bigger.
But I can sort of speak that language and say what I want in a very specific way. So I think that's something I think I would encourage in graphic design. For me, like, I would say that's my secondary skill, and it's helped me out and set me apart in so many ways, where even like right now, where my boss might say, oh, we don't have the money in the budget to send this to the agency to make this. I'm like, I can do that in half an hour. Let's make that happen. So what would you say to social media managers who are, I'm not trying to lead you into an anti-Canva bit, but like, well,
it's a trap. Get out. It's a trap.
Social media, well, that's the biggest criticism whenever I critique Canva is, well, what do you expect social media managers to do? So if a social media manager wants to expand their skill set into graphic design, where would you suggest they start?
Yeah, the Canva thing, it is hard because as a designer, of course, I hate it. And I think every Canva post looks exactly the same. Like, yeah, I guess the biggest piece of advice is try to learn a little bit if you can. And I think there's a lot of great tools, like lots of free tutorials out there. I'm trying to think of the one that I spent a lot of time on when I was deciding if I wanted to be a designer. I spent a lot of time just watching tutorial after tutorial, learning Photoshop. And Photoshop to me is one of the best skills that you can have working in this field because I'm a designer, there's often times where my design skills will come into play with the content that I'm creating. And I'm like, yeah, they all need to be cut out from the background, but you could get away with it not being cut out, but I'm going to do it. But there's times where it's just like little tiny edits. If you just knew like the bare minimum of Photoshop, it would make your content so much better and stand out so much more. Yeah, I think just taking advantage of all the free resources that are out there. So doing those free tutorials, but also if you have design friends, I think it's okay to, hey, can I get your eye on this? And that's one thing that as I'm seeing so many more like personal branding and things on Twitter, I'm like, oh, I wish you would have just asked me. Like I could have given you like a little bit of free advice, but also walking that line with your friends too and not expecting them to be your design consultant for free. But hey, can I get your eyes on this? I think is fair. And they want you to use their skills. Like you're their friend, use them,
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the same idea, kind of the way I learned was with the design team that I worked with, going and doing that same sort of thing, saying, hey, can I get your eyes on this? What would make this better? And they appreciated that for twofold. One, I was taking an interest in learning their craft and showing respect for it. But also, like, if you will take the time to show me how to make this better, I don't have to ask you to do it, right? It will lighten your load.
And you're making better designs. Because for me, I'm like, I just want better design in the world personally. Every time I see a bad design, I'm like, let me help you, please.
Definitely. I'm there almost every single day.
It kind of cuts a step out though, right? Like you're not necessarily having to do something, send it in for review through a real designer or staff designer to change it. You get high quality content published a lot quicker when it doesn't have to go through a chain of review because you already are both the designer and super skilled in the messaging side of it and in the interaction side of it and everything else.
Yeah, less edits. We do have to send all our work to the creative director to just take a look at it. But when you already know design, I rarely get any edits. And sometimes when I do, I'm like, oh, done. I also have gotten to know her really well because I'm always looking for another person to bounce ideas off of. And I think that is one way that I learned a lot about design, sitting in the classroom and just rolling my seat over to someone else. Like, hey, what do you think of this? Oh, why don't you like it? And really just talking it out with people helps you to learn so much.
I think a lot of times with our craft, sometimes we get those edits back and we kind of take them a little personally. And like when you work well with your team and those edits come back and it's more of a back and forth of like, okay, this is actually improving it, or this is helping me. It's such a good feeling. Like, I'm working with Zach McVicker at Amazon right now, and whenever I send him copy, he always, like, I've learned to be really brief with Twitter, but like he cuts out like so much, and I'm just like, oh yeah, wow, I did not need 30% of the words in there. That's excellent. It's so nice to work with. But it is very refreshing to have an editor that, like, instead of making my copy longer, makes it shorter. Like, that's a rarity. Like,
That's really
but
rare.
when you get that, it's such a treasure to be able to have that feedback.
Yeah, and I think that's one skill, being in social media or in design, being able to take feedback well and not to take things so personally, and looking at it as like, one, you don't have to take their feedback. You can say thank you for your feedback, and you don't have to make that change. I mean, unless it's your boss. But like when it comes to coworkers and peers taking a look at your piece, like, you don't have to take that feedback. But also, it's coming from a good place. Usually no one's out to get you to say, oh, your piece sucks. Like, maybe if you did this, it would be so much better. Like, you don't have to take it personally. They're just trying to help you.
I think this is something that people that have studied the arts get really, like they get that kind of intrinsically. Because if you went to art school or design school, or you have, a lit degree like JS does, like, you went through a criticism process, you went through an editing process, like you would have open critique days and whatever else, and have people in the room telling you like, yeah, this is what I don't like. And this, you learn to not take it personally, and it hurts the first couple of times you go through that, and then after you're like, oh, okay, well, it doesn't matter. And then I don't know, that I think this is me standing for the liberal arts at this point, but like, they give you such good, well-rounded, like, human societal skills where you don't take everything so personally.
I agree. I feel like when it comes to college, and when it comes to should I go to college, should I not go to college, well, do what's best for you. But one of my biggest things for it is like what you're saying, going to a four-year university helps to make you so much more of a well-rounded person. You're not just focusing on your skill, but you're also, you're learning Spanish, you're learning how to be a better writer, you're learning how to communicate with people better, and you're learning to see different perspectives outside your own. And I think going to four-year university is great if you can. I'm a big believer in four-year universities if it's possible for you.
Yeah, definitely. And like with the liberal arts, I talk about like my undergrad degree is in radio, television production that I got in 2001, right? And the editing suite I was using back then was a giant room. We were like the first year to get the digital editing go from, like, I started with actual physical tape to digital editing my senior year. And like everything that I had in that giant room is on my phone now, and I can make better quality video. Like, so that's all of that I learned is kind of useless, except for the fundamentals, like how to frame a shot, how to do a good edit.
Putting my studio recording classes to use with this podcast, JS.
Right. But for me, what the real value was that liberal arts side of like critical thinking, of sitting down and reading Moby Dick and analyzing it has helped me be a better social media manager. Hasn't made my content briefer, but yeah.
That's the thing too. A lot of people, when they major in one thing, they don't necessarily end up doing that for their career, hence graphic design and going towards social media, especially as new careers arise in the world. It's just learning how to think for yourself, learning how to be open-minded, learning how to read and communicate in effective ways that will help you in whatever career you end up in.
And that sort of learning how to teach yourself new skills, I think is of vital importance. And then, back to the criticism thing, like, we're social media managers. As soon as we hit send, our work is out there, and people will give you their criticism very quickly. So if you haven't...
luckily, I'm not an engagement manager. I feel so bad for our engagement managers and coordinators when something goes up that's maybe more controversial. If the sentiment is mostly negative, I feel so bad for them, because they're reading and responding to everything, because a good engagement manager responds to most things, and they're trying to have communication and build a community, but it's hard when the sentiment's all negative. More power to all the engagement people out there. So that's a hard world to be in most of the time.
Yeah, and definitely talk about addressing controversial topics, and I think Nickelodeon does this so well. And like I'm ready to click that like button so much. Like you did, like Trans Day of Visibility and a few other items that I think were really important, but definitely are going to be controversial and get those sort of comments. So in creating that content, can you address a little bit about the process and getting that out there?
Yeah, for me, being a designer and a social media manager, one thing that I often will find myself kind of like beating myself up for, and one thing I'm working on is, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. Like I'm not any of these things that are making a direct impact on people. But then when we started really putting content out there to support Black Lives Matter and to inform kids on things that are going on in the world, that made me feel so proud to work for Nickelodeon and to be a part of a company that's really trying to make a positive impact on the world by educating a lot of kids who maybe their parents aren't talking to them about these things. And it's not always biased either. It's just this is what happened, and kids are gonna see it. Kids are on their phones at an early age these days. Like, let's show them what's happening in the world in a way that's less scary, and to show them that they're not alone and they're gonna be okay. Because yeah, again, not every parent is talking about the things that need to be talked in a way that's less scary for kids. And I'm really proud to be at Nickelodeon right now. And it is hard because there are a lot of people that don't like the things that we post that are maybe more controversial. And at the end of the day, it's deciding what are our values as a company, who are the people that need to really feel loved right now, and how can we best support the people that are hurting as a company with the means to do that and to help educate. And
No, you've nailed it. I think that's something
okay.
higher ed.
I don't know how to
No,
touch on
no.
the haters so much.
Well, it's a difficult thing to do, and I think it's something higher ed has to reckon with, because even though we sometimes espouse these values, not every institution, some institutions are, everyone's different, but like are afraid to put forth that and are afraid of that criticism and those comments that are inevitable on any sort of post that may be controversial. So
there's always going to be people that disagree with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just trying to figure out, like, what do we stand for? What are we posting? And I'm sorry if you don't disagree. Like, this is what we stand for. This is on our platform, what we're speaking from, what's on our hearts, I guess. As a company, do you have a heart? But like, you do. All the hearts of the people.
Right. Exactly. So to kind of wrap things up in one final question, I think, especially for higher ed, and our higher ed audience would be interested in hearing, is we have struggled so hard to reach younger people in so many ways, and as trends change so rapidly. So what do you see that preteens, teens who are starting to look at colleges and apply, where do you think higher ed needs to be, and like what trends do they need to be aware of?
It's hard because, are you sure? Because Nickelodeon, I feel like it's kids like 7, 10 years old. And then you have like the Avatar fan base or the Teen Nick fan base. They're all like my age or like 30 or older now. And when it comes to that answer, a lot of it is some of the same stuff I was saying before, just like looking for inspiration off brands that are doing what you want to be doing and testing. And I'm not really sure I have a direct answer for that one.
I like how many times we've said testing, because no one does it in higher ed, and I keep telling them to do it. Just test. Not no one. There are a few institutions that do a really good job of it, but it's constantly this. If you're going to make a change to your website, test it. Make sure it didn't fail. Make sure it didn't cause problems for your conversion rates. And like, if you're going to do social media posts at all, like, don't do something super risky without testing out something a little less risky first to see if it works. Like the Bernie memes and all that.
Yeah.
Like, it's how do you go about, like in higher ed? How do you go about making content that's not cringy all the time, while still maintaining your brand identity? And I think part of that is just testing things out and seeing if a thing worked versus just, let's just post it all forever and ever and ever. And, and then you're just oblivious and look stupid because you're not paying attention to it not working. But,
yeah, I think, again, it goes back to really listening and researching like what your audience wants and what they need to, because sometimes what they want is what they necessarily need, and testing everything and looking for inspiration always.
I think that's a good point about like what they want versus what they need. I think anytime when I've worked in higher ed and focus group students, I always get the same answer. Be more like Wendy's. And that's not what we need to be in higher ed, right? And maybe that's what you want, but that's not what you need, and that's not what the university needs to be. So sometimes focus grouping just does not work. So finding that balance of, you do need to ask and kind of see what your audience wants, but it's okay to say like, I know you want that, but that's not what you need.
And then test out what you think they need and see how it performs, and it probably will do well.
Yeah, you don't want your college clapping back at you like Wendy's. That's just not.
Yeah, no. Yeah, there is a big line between Nickelodeon between higher ed. Like higher ed, like if I'm looking for a college, like I want them to be pretty decently professional to show that there's a place where I want to study. And I don't know if I want to see Bernie memes on my university's social media account. It's just kind of weird.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I feel about that too. But but it is that trick of like multiple audiences of like prospective students, parents, and current students, alumni. Like they all
sounds
want
like a hard position to be in.
Something different. So okay, I make a post that's targeted at current students, and alumni see it and like, what the heck are you doing? What does this mean? So it's a juggling act a little bit.
It sounds so hard because with Nickelodeon, we're focusing on kids, but you're focusing on multiple demographics and one social media account. That sounds so difficult.
And even alumni is like, you go from young alumni that are, like people your age, my age, Bailey, to working professionals that are 20, 30 years out of college, to like people in their 70s that happen to be on Facebook or something. Like it's such a wide mix of people with so many different interests, and just to get the messaging not to be fragmented is challenging. It's a huge marketing challenge in higher ed. And so like, I don't know, I think a lot of it gets ignored because it's just really hard. It's like, let's just put this over here and ignore it, and maybe it'll go away. And then, 10 years later, you end up having to address it. But
yeah. Well, one thing though, I think with all of that, especially when it comes to the design, just keeping things simple. Like, don't getting wild with design, because old people, they need to be able to read it, and then also young people, like they don't want that much content or copy anyway. Like the more simple it could be, the better.
Yeah, I think if there's a key takeaway, it's like cut. Like there's always something you can cut, right? Not that word that you're clinging onto in your tweet that you think the entire tweet hinges on. If you remove it, it's okay. Like people are going to get the idea.
And that's one thing like you learn when you're in school, like adjectives and like fluffer words and stuff. But now working in social media, you're any word that's not necessary, you're cutting. Anything, even in design, anything that's not necessary and that's not serving a function, you don't need it. Sometimes like there is a place for all those things, but not always necessary in social.
All right, Bailey, thank you so much for being with us. We're thrilled to have you on the podcast, and look forward to seeing even more work from you on Nickelodeon Stories. If you're not following Nick and Nick Jr. on Instagram, you need to check them out. TikTok, their work is incredible. I shout out to you guys all the time just because I every time I look at y'all's stories, I'm inspired. So that said, thank you for being on the podcast. And where can people find you? Do you have anything to plug, your Twitter account, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it's at Bailey Cargill, BaileyCargill on Twitter, Instagram, my website, baileycargill.com. I also have a mental health account called Lemonade. It's LEMONAID. And then the handle on Instagram is lemonade.blog. So if you're interested in anything mental health and looking for support and for resources, you can find me there as well. Oh, and then also my dog's TikTok account at Ella Cargill.
Excellent. We definitely have to check that one out.
Dog content is the best content.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to the Thought Feeder podcast. If you'd like to listen to past episodes, you can go to thoughtfeederpod.com or find us wherever you get your podcasts. We would appreciate a like or a review if you can leave one, especially if you like listening to our podcast. If you don't like listening to our podcast, don't leave a review, please. You just stop listening. That's fine. You can also follow us on Twitter at ThoughtFeedPod. Once again, Bailey, thanks so much for being on the show. This is a great conversation. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thought Feeder is a production of University Insight.